1. Please be aware the following story contains references to and activities involving deer hunting. Just outside of a large metropolitan city, I live in a suburban area that is known for having a diverse wildlife population within its subdivisions. Raccoons, foxes, rabbits, hawks, possums, coyotes, turkey, and deer are all common sights to be seen prowling through our yards. It is one of the features that attracted me to the area when I was looking to buy a house. Within only a 15 to 20 minute drive, I can be downtown experiencing all that urban lifestyle has to offer. But I get to at least feel like I live out in nature. My neighbors echo these sentiments, but some of them also get irritated with the destruction and inconveniences that can come with living in such close proximity to wildlife in a suburban area.
I about hit a deer with my car the other day. The deer ate blah blah dollars worth of my landscaping,
are common utterances. One of my neighbors came forth and offered our neighborhood association president his altruistic solution. He offered to bow hunt the deer from the neighborhood common grounds, and that all he needed was her blessing. He discussed this with no other neighbors except ones he legally had to warn, which included only the neighborhood association president and the neighbors to the adjoining property of the common ground. My house is one of those adjoining properties, and the bow hunter was particularly interested in my house, because my property had the easiest access into the wooded common ground. Keep in mind this area is only about the size of 2 football fields in length and is relatively shallow. Although we had yet to meet prior, he caught me off guard arriving dressed in full camouflage hunting gear and calling me out by name. This made me quite uncomfortable. In addition, his physique is quite intimidating, being a very tall, rugged-looking man with bulgy eyes. He introduced himself, saying that the neighborhood had requested that he cull the herd of deer. I explained to him that I had just moved in, had small children, and didn't like the idea of him hunting so close to my yard. He reassured me about the safety of his hunting methods, showed me letters of permission from City Hall and the police department, and told me that he is insured against any damages and injuries.
"Your neighbors are overwhelmingly in support of this," he informed me. "You won't even notice me. I just want access to walk through your yard."
Not wanting to make a bad impression with the new neighbors, I reluctantly agreed under the conditions that he came back by when my wife was present to give her an opportunity to ask questions, and that he would inform me when he planned to be behind my house hunting. We exchanged numbers. He grinned, shook my hand fervently, and assured me we had a deal. Months go by, and I heard nothing, so I assumed that his plans to hunt must have fallen through. My next-door neighbor, though, stops me one day in the fall, and in a frustrated tone described to me an encounter he had with the bow hunter. He said that he caught the hunter and his buddies crossing through his yard, and when he stopped them, the hunter told him he had my permission to go back there, that he could hunt, and that there was nothing he could do about it. Whoa. I explained that was not at all the deal I had with the bow hunter. He was the only one I thought who was going to be hunting. He was supposed to have talked to me and my wife about it again, and he had said he would tell me when he was going to be back there. My neighbor then says that after watching the hunters go back into the woods, he noticed later that afternoon that there is now a dead deer laying in the brush on the edge of the woods, on my property line. I rush back there, and sure enough, there is a dead deer with what appears to be a puncture mark on its side. I immediately call up our neighborhood association president, fuming mad. She promises me that the deer is definitely not from the hunter. "Probably got hit by a car. You know how dangerous these deer are," she said. I explained I'm not paying the $400 removal fee, and she promised the association will pay it this time. When I ask if she can stop the hunting, she says that it is completely safe, and I should be grateful that the bow hunter is sacrificing his time and energy. I respond by telling her the bow hunter is no longer allowed anywhere on or near my property. A couple more weeks go by, and my neighbor has been telling this story to the other residents. No one else in the neighborhood even knew this hunting was going on. Soon there was a petition floating around, and neighbors began calling our association president to put an end to the hunting. Right around this time, the bowhunter finally makes good on his word to come back and talk to my wife. Unfortunately, he chooses to come by at noon on a random Tuesday while I am at work. When my wife voices her displeasure with the hunting, he gets frustrated and proceeds to tear into her by getting in her face, raising his voice, and giving my wife what she described as crazy eyes, enough to frighten her. She asks him to leave and felt so threatened that she calls the police. The police tell us that there is nothing we can do. He filled out the permits and that, legally, the association president has say in what happens on the common ground. Frustrated with how I feel disrespected by the bowhunter, I begin doing research into the safety and effectiveness of urban bow hunting for deer population control. My research turns up good points for both sides of the argument, but I selectively summarize it with more tree-hugging, nature-loving, don't-do-harm-to-the-animals type sources, and begin rallying up neighbors to stop this particular bowhunter. This is the same time that the arm hair-raising creepiness started. At 3 a.m., my wife bolts up in bed and slaps my arm. Do you hear that? I wake up to hear just the last couple beats of the pounding sound. I'm not sure where the sound came from, but it sounded like it was right outside our bedroom door. What the hell was that? I ask, sitting up in bed. One of the kids got out of bed? I look at their baby monitors. No, the oldest is still snoozing, and the youngest was woken up but is only stirring slightly. Our dog is upright in a guarded position, standing at our bedroom door. I get out of bed. I grab a pocket knife off my dresser and take the dog to investigate. Nothing outside our bedroom door. I creep down the hall to the entryway and front door. Nothing. I look out the window. Nothing. Was that my imagination? No, my wife heard it. The dog heard it. It woke up one of my kids. I begin to rationalize it. Maybe the wind. Push something into the front door. Large stick fell onto the roof. Maybe stupid teenagers as a prank. I get back in bed. My wife and I talk for about an hour to calm down, but decide to let it go. A week later, 3 a.m., I'm startled awake again by my wife. She's white as a ghost. She whispers to me like a terrifying secret she just can't keep in. Someone just beat on our front door again. No way, I think. I would have heard it. I hadn't heard anything this time. But then I noticed the dog. Same position at the bedroom door, like he is going to lunge at something on the other side. I notice on the baby monitors our kids are also both moving around in their beds. I do have a reputation for being a pretty heavy sleeper. I grab my knife and the dog and I go to investigate again. And once again I uncover no signs of anything. I tell my wife I think it's the furnace kicking on and off, and that maybe it's rattling the bedroom door. She doesn't believe that reason, but she accepts it, if only to comfort her back to sleep. That Friday night I wake up right before 3 a.m. to use the restroom. I return to bed and my wife, still being on edge, is awake, and surprises me by asking if everything is all right. I tell her, yeah, I just had to use the restroom. I begin to close my eyes and drift off back to sleep, when the unmistakable sound of someone beating against our front door brings me fully awake. The pounding sounds angry. This person doesn't just want to wake us up, they are trying to bash the door in. The dog slunks down and starts to growl. I desperately want him to bark and sound ferocious, but I can tell he is also scared. Call the police, I tell my wife in a voice that is shaking. She frantically grabs her cell phone and begins to dial the police. I grab the knife and the dog by the collar, just like the times before, but I'm determined to catch the person this time. I get to the front door and I see glowing red taillights down the street. It's a white car, maybe a gray car. I seriously can't tell, maybe blue. They are out of sight. Everything seemed like it just happened so fast. I realize I don't have pants on. I run back to the bedroom and throw on sweatpants and head outside. The driveway is wet. I can see the tire marks, but they don't tell me anything other than reaffirm that someone definitely drove by and knocked on our door. The police come. They assure us it was probably nothing, probably just kids, they say. We realize the date is Friday the 13th, and the probability seems to increase that it was completely harmless. They offer to do extra patrols and suggest we get cameras since this is happening with such frequency. Calls if anything else happens. We go back to bed, spend the rest of the night hypothesizing who would do this to us. But don't come up with anyone other than maybe the bow hunter. I order and install security cameras that weekend. I play with the idea of making a gun more accessible, but counter it with the risk to the kids. I continue talking with the neighbors about our middle-of-the-night knocking, and no one believes that the bow hunter would be doing it. Completely out of his character, they assure me. Through these conversations, I also come to find out that Tuesday, the neighborhood association president has called for an emergency meeting to discuss the deer hunting. We all meet at the local library, and the meeting quickly turns to an ugly spar between the pro and negative hunting groups. It is about a 50-50 split between the people who want the neighbor hunting in the common ground and the people who don't want him hunting, and there seems to be no compromising. The hunter finally interrupts the arguing as it continues to escalate, and says that we are getting insane here and need to be reasonable adults. He goes on to explain that he has been getting death threats left on his phone and threatening mail. My mind instantly goes to the middle of the night knocking on our door. So he is being harassed too. Our neighborhood really has lost its mind. I'm definitely now thinking that the knocking was related to me speaking out so vocally against the hunting, but I'm not certain anymore that it was the bow hunter himself. Maybe it was another irate neighbor. We never decided anything at the neighborhood meeting that night. The neighbors just barely avoided resorting to fisticuffs. Later I attempted to fight the bow hunting at the city level, but my objection was mainly concerning our personal neighborhood bow hunter, and how he and our association president went about starting it. Our councilman informed me at the meetings that unless I rally a whole bunch of people to start calling their councilmen against urban bow hunting, it will be hard to fight. They explained that the city council gets a lot of deer complaint calls, and neighborhood bow hunting is a free and easy intervention for them to tell residents they are doing to help. Unfortunately, most people don't even know it is going on in their neighborhoods to protest it, even if they are against it. I lost my motivation to fight the urban bow hunting in our neighborhood and gave up my efforts. As for the knocking, it hasn't happened since I put up the security cameras, and no one has admitted to it. So whoever was beating on my front door at 3 a.m., let's not meet this way. How about you come at 3 p.m. and we can have a civil adult discussion? I like to think I am actually quite reasonable. 2. So this happened to me back in 2013, shortly before New Year's. I am a female born and bred in South Africa, but at the time I was living in London and had recently turned 21. A friend of mine from South Africa had traveled up to London for a holiday in early December. When we met up, she invited me to come spend New Year with her in Paris, as she had some family who lived there that had invited her to stay with them. Not having anything planned, I thought this sounded like a really great idea. And also I'm a sucker for the Eiffel Tower. She was planning to take the Eurostar, but being quite broke at the time, I decided to book a cheap megabus up alone. So she naturally arrived in record time during the day, and I was due to arrive sometime in the evening. I told her I would call when I arrived, and she said that her and her cousins would come pick me up. After a really long trip, I got dropped off at the bus stop. The bus stop was right by a mall, or in a mall. This is where my memory gets a bit hazy. I remember calling my friend when I arrived and her telling me to walk through the mall and meet her at a specific parking lot close to one of the mall entrances. So there I was, it was late, it was dark, I'm alone. I'm sitting on my trolley suitcase with my back against the wall, and my other smaller bag standing next to me, waiting patiently for them to arrive, The area I was sitting in was well lit, but at the time it was deserted. I could see people in the distance milling about, but no one in near proximity to me. I remember feeling safe at the time, as I was right by a busy mall. Also possibly relevant to say, but in South Africa you need to be on your guard 24/7, as crime is rampant. However, a few months living in London had kind of eased me into a space where I had become far less guarded and less vigilant about safety. I guess I became somewhat implicitly trusting of my surroundings, which is naive looking back, but I was young and dumb, etc. So anyway, there I am, twiddling thumbs. I suddenly notice what looked to be two older men walking towards me. They must have been about mid-30s. Hard to remember exactly. They walk directly over to me and strike up what appears to be an innocent conversation, simply asking if I was okay, and if someone would be coming for me soon. Initially, in keeping with my naive mindset, I didn't feel alarmed or threatened. I genuinely thought they were just being friendly and looking out for me. We talk a little longer, and they ask more questions like where I'm from, what I'm doing in Paris, who I'm staying with, etc. I remember the one guy in particular was more talkative and charming, whilst the other was a bit quieter and seemed visibly angsty. Think restless body language. Now remember I said I was sitting on my trolley suitcase with my back against the wall. I notice that their body positioning begins to alter slightly, like they were coming a bit closer but also positioning themselves so that I was somewhat cornered. As soon as I became aware of this, the entire tone of the interaction shifted for me, and every alarm bell possible started going off. I started to politely attempt to end the conversation by saying my friend and her cousins would be there shortly, but that it was nice to meet them. The one guy suddenly told me that I should come with them in his car, the more talkative, charismatic one. I tried to decline, but he began to become more adamant and more urgent about it. As I could tell he was going to reach for me, out of the corner of my eye I saw someone walking briskly towards us. Their eyes darted over, and they suddenly dashed. I realized it was a security guard as he came closer. He came straight up to me and told me to gather my belongings and walk with him to sit inside the mall. I quietly obliged. As he settled me in, he told me they had been observing the interaction on their security cameras, and decided it would be best to intervene. They said based on the situation it looked like a possible abduction waiting to happen. So incredibly thankful they did, as I don't know what would have happened if they had come any later. I called my friend and she apologized and said they were nearly there. I was a bit shaken by the incident, but mostly just relieved nothing worse happened. So I guess creepy older men who tried to get me to come into their car, let's not meet again, thanks in advance. 3. As you may already know, Venezuela is a country that is deep in corruption and bad government policies that spread to its public servants and forces. As a Venezuelan citizen, I am afraid of the police, the same ones that must protect us by oath, and the particular reason for it is that they are common criminals in uniform, or people that had good intentions when joining the force, but due to the country's problems have chosen to blackmail people into submission for spare cash, even going as far as kidnapping you with the excuse of arresting you for any little thing, to make your relatives pay the bail. That is exactly what happened to me and my now ex-girlfriend. My ex-girlfriend and I were studying law at the moment, and had various classes together. One particular day she didn't show up for any of the classes, and I got worried, so I called her repeatedly and nothing. I got even more worried, so I called her mother and she told me she didn't know as well, and had been worried too. Knowing that she drives alone in her car when going to the university, I thought immediately that she had had an accident, and I panicked, so I took my car and drove it in the route she takes when going to the university. And nothing, no sign of her or her car. I decided to call a very good friend of mine, a professor on forensic investigations, to ask for help and try to find her. 13 hours passed with no one knowing about her. He agreed and offered to send a search alert on her. He had the contacts and power to do so, whilst we found the area she could be on. After 4 more hours and the search going on and on, her mother calls me, panicked to the bone and crying loudly. telling me that her daughter has been kidnapped and they were demanding 4 million bolivars. That at the time had to be like $6,000, which was incredibly expensive and the money was just not there. Hearing this, I crack and get incredibly angry, but I tried my best to be calmed. So I asked her if she was given any special instructions to follow, in which she replied that the transaction had to be made by one person that is related to her, alone in their whereabouts within 24 hours, and of course not telling the police. And I had the call on speaker. The professor listened and told us that this had to be planned in the CICPC Central. CICPC is like the FBI or any other country's equivalent. So we all went to the Central and gathered there, her whole family, the agents, the professor and I. We handed the options to the table and concluded that the best way to even have a chance of getting her back was by actually paying the requested amount and attack the compound shortly after to get it back and jailing the criminals. A relative or a friend had to go by the request, so I offered because apart from being her boyfriend, I was part of a forensic program that had Navy training, so I was, in theory, capable of handling that type of scenario. The money was gathered up, the family put up some of their savings, I put mine, and the Central gave us some as well. That was all transferred to my account. We contacted the thugs through my phone, and I spoke up and set the deal. They made her speak to me for 15 seconds to prove she was there and alive. The place of the reunion was a ranch located out of the city in a nearby town. I went in my car while followed by the agents that were at least 200 meters away from me at all times, in particular vehicles. Before I arrive at the ranch, a man stands before me on the road telling me to stop. He goes by my window and pulls a weapon out, and tells me to step out of the vehicle and puts me in the back seat. After that, 2 more men came in and drove the car to the ranch while I had 2 guns pointed at my head. They were effectively the kidnappers and told me that this minor kidnap of me was a little cautious move to prevent anything bad from happening. We get to the ranch and the first thing I see when I stepped in is my ex being pushed to the front and getting several guns pointed at her. I remain calm and pull my phone out to make the deposit. They deliver the accounts and I proceeded to do the transfer. While I'm on it, the app can't make any transfer due to connectivity problems. My navigation data wasn't connected, so it wouldn't connect, because there was no signal, and they apparently didn't think this through, and accused me of trying to buy time for some kind of raid, and without any further discussion, I get hit in the head with a shotgun stock, and plummeted to the floor, followed by several more to the body, including kicks and punches. Now they had tied us together, and they were trying to contact other relatives to make a second offer, of now 10 million bolivars, within 12 hours or else we would be killed. 3 hours passed and the door is knocked and the thugs opened it without any concern. And 2 individuals enter, 2 very interesting individuals. Cops, the 2 men that entered were actual police of the state. And looked at us and said, "How much are you asking for them?" They talked and after a while they were gone. After an hour we hear multiple sirens and men shouting outside the ranch. The thugs quickly grabbed us and pulled us to another ranch that was connected to the main one, put us in a room and closed a thick metal door. A major shootout was taking place for at least 30 minutes, in which I tried to untie the ropes, and succeeded. I untied both of us and started trying to get out of the room. That was easy enough because the ceiling was made out of a misplaced zinc plate. We climbed over the room and fell into a sewage that directed us to the agent side of the fight. We got with them. They looked surprised at us because we actually managed to escape, and put us on a patrol car back to the Central, while the shootout was still taking place. Back at the Central, there's both of our families surprised and happy to see us back in one piece. And after that, we make our declarations to the agents and told everything we saw and heard while captive. When I told them about the police officers, they weren't impressed. Actually, no one was impressed by it anymore, and asked me to be more specific with things about them, which I happily answered. The cops were actually put into custody and were given the tratamiento de sapos mamahuevos, which is basically beat the shit out of them and cutting the tip of their tongue. And then it was revealed that all the men involved in the kidnapping were police officers on active duty. It was found out because of the investigation of the deceased bodies of some of the kidnappers that also made the tracing of the others who fled easier. Though the story ends on a happy note after all. Some of the fuckers are dead, and others put into jail. That wouldn't have survived because the first thing prisoners do to cops in jail is cutting their penises and fuck them with it. Not kidding. And a family reunited. A couple back together. We broke up about a year later, but okay. And a side note here, this kind of thing happens every single day, and I'm not a special person by having been one. It's almost a cultural thing by now. You're not a real Venezuelan if you haven't been kidnapped. And some people, the wealthiest ones, take it as a day-to-day thing. They just pay the amount at the moment and that's it. It's more a robbery than a kidnapping. So take this as a lesson on how a country's population can be reduced to a systematic novel. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 358. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, as you guys get this story, it will be New Year's Eve. It'll be 7 p.m. for me, earlier or later for somebody. It might even be New Year for some of you in some time zones. So, for those of you who have already experienced it, Happy New Year. For those that's yet to come, I hope you have a good time when it comes. Okay, and I think I'm going to wrap it up there for now and for the year. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.